There's a moment in every spiritual journey when you realize that what you were taught to feel is not the same as what you were taught to know. And that's when chasing feelings gets confused with chasing the truth. Hey, everybody, this is your girl, Coach G, your certified life and wellness coach with a master's in psychology and a PhD in life. Today's topic in our series of PTSD, where we are talking about religious patterns and traditions, survival and deliverance. And it's all about understanding how the beliefs came about and how those same beliefs shape the way we cope and how the way we cope determine whether we stayed stuck in survival mode or finally stepped out into deliverance. We're driving into what happens when people get emotionally moved and emotionally charged, but they never actually got grounded in biblical truths. So let's get into it. A lot of us grew up in spaces where the louder the room was, the more we felt that was the anointing. And whenever the music swelled and the organ or the choir modulated, suddenly everybody felt something. Listen, music is powerful and it opens you up emotionally. It lowers your defenses, it makes you receptive. And that's why music, when it breaks down the emotional barriers that we have, it's so easy for us to be manipulated. Maybe some of you can remember, I think the song was by Missy Elliott. And if you know, you know. She dropped a song back in 2005 called Music Makes You Lose Control. Now, this is secular music, and she is saying music makes you lose control. And listen, she wasn't lying. She was literally talking about the power of music and the energy that it wields. Because music, it can do that. It can open you up emotionally. It can lower your guard and it can make you more receptive. Music can make you um, open up to what is true, but it can also make you open up to a lie before you even realize it was a lie. If you haven't already, there will come a time when you'll start realizing that the emotionalism brought on by the music, that something is missing, something deeper. And that beliefs uh, is where you're told to accept what is true and accept what is flawed. And you start kind of meshing all of that together, and you come out with all these questions of why are they saying this and why are they saying that? And why is this not meshing? Why is this not resonating with my spirit? For many of us, that moment came sooner than later. I know it did for me. We realized that we never actually stopped to ask ourselves if we even understood what we were responding to. Was it God or was it music? And that's why today I want to talk about something that intersect with culture, with conditioning, and with faith. And that's when performance replaces biblical truths. We were taught to feel deeply, but we were rarely taught to think critically. And there were reasons why we weren't taught to think critically. So let's revisit that organ player for a minute. And I say that because I was one of those organ players. And I love sitting behind that B3 Hammond, and trust me, organists know the exact time when they need to go into overdrive. And whether it's the pastor and he's preaching or she is preaching, or it's someone that they spot in the congregation that they see are about to like break out in a shout. When they hit that right chord, it's over. And that might have gone on for 30 minutes or longer. But herein lies the spiritual burnout, the unspoken consequences of being carried away emotionally. We were conditioned to respond to the atmosphere, but we weren't encouraged to really listen and examine the words that were not only spoken to us, but words that were spoken over us. And somewhere along the way, emotionalism became the substitute for understanding biblical principles, and performance became a tool to keep us distracted from looking deeper into the actual scriptures. And as long as folk felt good, as long as they were shouting, as long as they were running and falling out and speaking in tongues, they believed they had church. Yeah, church. But what they had experienced was just pure emotional fests with each other. That's what they were experiencing. And in those moments, if you didn't respond the same way, you felt like something was wrong with you, right? You felt unspiritual. You felt maybe like you weren't anointed, like you felt like God was touching everybody around you, but he wasn't touching you. But remember now, I said music is powerful. So it's not because God had forgotten you. Music had gotten them. But because of the culture of that atmosphere, the expectation you had and what you had come to believe was that if you didn't, there was something wrong with you. You needed to repent, or you needed God's forgiveness, or you had sinned. And many people came to believe that based off of what they felt or what they did, and not that was what was biblically sound. So let's take, for instance, the teaching about the day of Pentecost. The people were in the upper room in Jerusalem, and it talks about a sound like a mighty rushing wind that filled the room, and tongues of fire rested on their heads, and different people began to speak in different languages that were not like their native tongue. So fast forward, you have individuals teaching that if you don't speak in tongues, you don't have the Spirit of God in you, right? I know you've heard it, but that's not Bible. That's not scripture. The Bible does not teach that speaking in tongues is the only evidence of having the Spirit. If you actually search scriptures, you'll see that's not a requirement. Paul even asked, do all speak in tongues? Do all prophesy? Do all have the gifts of healing? So, in other words, speaking in tongue was never presented as a prerequisite for salvation or spiritual identity. But that's the one thing about emotional hype. Once people get caught up in the moment, they stop checking the message. The atmosphere gets loud, the room gets charged, the music is swelling, and suddenly whatever is being said feels true simply because it feels, and hear me when I say it feels powerful. The emotions starts validating the doctrine instead of the doctrine validating the emotions. But that's the one thing about emotional hype. It's contagious. It sweeps you up. It makes you feel like you're experiencing something different, something profound, even when you don't understand what's happening, even when you're not sure why you're reacting the way you're reacting, even when the reaction is more about the moment than the message that is trying to be relayed, right? And I don't think that this is talked about enough. Emotionalism is not relationship. Hype is not holiness. Shouting, speaking in tongues, falling out on the floor, long dress, short skirt, no jewelry, no makeup, hair in a bun or hair down your back, beard or shaved. That's not salvation. That's religion. And that's the religion that many of us were taught. And it doesn't equate to being truly changed through biblical truths. Some of us were raised to believe that dressing a particular way um, or being emotional rather, meant that we must have been close to God, right? Or that the place that we were worshiping in must have been sanctioned by Him. When in essence, Ichabod had clearly been written on the door. And I have sat in churches that was just like that. They were charged, they were electrified, there was emotion, there was all the things. But if you had the discernment, you knew something was missing. And people would try to make you think, or in this case, feel like you miss God somehow because you choose to not get caught up in the emotional aspects, but instead you choose to discern between emotions and facts. Now, there will be those who would try and make you think it's wrong or somehow dangerous for you to do this, to question, because they feel like you don't have the right to and that you shouldn't. And instead, you should just take things at face value. Anything the pastor or whoever, visiting preacher, whoever says, it is what it is. Uh, and that's what you should do. And if you don't do it, God is going to be angry with you. And God forbid your car break down or you lose your job because they will somehow tie that to God punishing you because how dare you question authority? But my question to that would be, whose authority? There are so many scriptures that will be used to manipulate you into believing you can't hear God because He only speaks to certain people. Listen, seeking the truth is a sign of spiritual maturity, and a good leader will encourage that. But because we've never studied, we never knew that what was truth and what was tradition. We never really understood who God was and what was the convictions, what was the conditioning that we were raised up in or that we were led to believe. Because when the music got loud, when the space got electrified, we became vulnerable. And so we were like sponges because we weren't watchful and we weren't paying attention. And when you mix unexamined doctrine with emotional hype, you create a faith that looks powerful on the outside, but it feels fragile on the inside, a faith that depends on stimulation rather than true salvation, a faith that burns really bright on Sunday mornings, but it burns out hours after you leave the service because you go straight to social media and give someone a piece of your mind or condemn someone because of your own personal convictions. So you feel like everybody needs to live exactly like you live, right? Have you not seen that? And after the hyped emotional service where you had the opportunity to perform, when you hit the real world, that faith that performed so well inside the church collapses in a time it's needed to shine the most. Your faith leaves you exalted. It leaves you feeling guilty. It leaves you feeling spiritually malnourished because you were taught that faith meant for you to perform for God instead of being present with Him, taking time to know Him on a personal level. Listen, performance is just that, it's performance. The sound of a loud drum or maybe even the swelling notes of a B3 Hammond, it puts you in emotions. It doesn't put you in His presence. It's about that still small voice that speaks to your heart, not glorify in your performance. Performance is exhausting. You ever been shouting and you shouted so long you were just tired? Performance is exhausting. But getting to know someone on a more intimate level is restorative. Performance is about being seen. Relationship is about coming into a spiritual knowing that is so profound that you're too busy loving people and keeping your own yard clean to worry about putting on a show for people's approval. And a lot of us, we've learned to perform. We learned that. We learned the cues. We learned the language. We learned the expressions. We learned how to look save, how to sound anointed, how to act holy. We learn how to be deep without a true foundation. We learn how to be emotional without truly being educated in the word. We learn to work, but we've never really learned how to be anchored. We mistook all these emotions or all those emotions brought on by the drum and the choir and the preacher and the organ and the music. We learned how to perform. But maturity isn't how high you jump. It's not how much you speak in tongues. It's how you treat people. It's how you deeply understand what salvation is all about. It's not how loud you shout. It's how clearly you can discern biblical truths from doctrines of men. It's not how emotional you get so much so that you run around the church with your hands up in the air. It's how anchored you are after all that emotionalism fades away. When the atmosphere shifts and the music stops and the crowd disperse, the room gets quiet. When the hype settles, What you're left with is what you actually know, what you actually believe, what you understand about God, about yourself, and about the faith you claim to live by. And that, my listeners, is why this conversation is so important because too many people are spiritually exhausted. They're malnourished, and metaphorically speaking, they're too afraid to go to someone else's house to eat because if that's what you choose to do and you're afraid to do it, then you shouldn't well, actually, you shouldn't be afraid to do it. Let me say it like that. You shouldn't be afraid to do it. Because if you really get grounded, if you really understand that God is not about performance, He is not about you jumping around, screaming and hollering. He's just not about that. He's about you knowing that you are loved, that you are important, and that you live life more abundantly. That's what He's about. And too many people, unfortunately, feel disconnected, not because God is distant, but because they were never taught how to be present with Him without a stage or without a soundtrack or without an audience. And too many people feel confused, not because they lack faith, but because they were never given permission to study or to question or to think or to grow. And I'm here to say that you don't have to keep performing. He's not concerned with that. He wants you connected with Him instead of connecting with the idea of Him. You don't have to live burned out. You don't have to live confused or spiritually exhausted. How you experience God is for you, not for anyone else. And you can choose presence over performance. You can choose understanding over emotionalism. You have the right to choose truth over tradition. And you can choose relationship over being theatrical. And when you do, I promise you something will shift. You will know and you will feel it. Your faith becomes quieter but stronger. Your relationship is less dramatic and more intimate. Your spiritual life becomes less about proving something and more about becoming someone who is whole, someone who's grounded, someone who's free. We have been led down a rabbit hole for far too long about who God is and how we have to show up for Him and how He shows up for us. His love is unconditional because at the end of the day, as I stated, God is not impressed by your performance. He's moved by your presence. He's drawn to your honesty. He desires truth on the inward parts. He's connected to your authenticity. He doesn't want our theatrics. Listen, I'm not here to say you shouldn't be shouting. You shouldn't be speaking in tongues and even falling on the floor if that's what you do. But I am here to tell you the truth so that you can heal from your PTSD. That's it. That's all. Hey, everybody, this is your girl, Coach G again. If you've been listening today and something has given you pause or something maybe have made you rethink what you were taught, that's a good thing. That's growth. God never asked you to turn up emotional hype. He never asked you to confuse goosebumps with guidance. And He never asked us to accept every tradition as truth. That B3 Hammond, that drummer, that choir that knows how to bring it with those last notes, that preacher that knows how to bring it when they're rearing back and putting that hand over the ear, that might wake you up for a moment, but being well versed is truly understanding biblical truths. It's what keeps you grounded when the music stops and life gets real. So, all I ask is that you take what you've heard today and sit with it, question it, search the scriptures. That's what I want you to do. Allow yourself to be stretched. Thank you so much for tuning in to this Wednesday morning or whenever you're listening. And I want you to make sure that you share this episode. I want you to hit that like button and subscribe. Leave your thoughts in the comments section. And meet me next Wednesday at 6 a.m. here on YouTube or on Spotify as we continue this PTSD series, Patterns, Traditions, Survival, and Deliverance. And until next time, get out there and conquer the world. And if not the world, conquer yourself.
Can we do it?